Say your word for EY. Out loud, once. If you would rather not say it, it is on the screen. If you speak Tagalog, you just said mata. Same in Cebuano, Ilocano, Waray, Kapampangan. An Ami speaker on the east coast of Taiwan says mata. So does a Fijian. So does a Samoan. Ethnologue counts 175 living indigenous languages in this country. The Comisión sa Wikang Filipino counts 135. Nobody has drawn a clean family tree for either number. In 2021, a team led by Maximilian Larina at Uppsala University published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, working with the National Commission for Culture and the Arts here. They genotyped 1,028 people from 115 indigenous Philippine communities. In each genome, they read about 2.3 million spots where one person differs from another. They also sequenced 2 individuals from Liangdao in the Taiwan Strait, radiocarbon dated to roughly 8,000 and 7,500 years old. The people who brought that word for I left things in the ground. Red-slipped pottery and stone adzes in the Batans and in the Cagayan Valley between roughly 4,200 and 4,000 years ago. Peter Bellwood of the Australian National University and Eusebio Dizon of the National Museum of the Philippines excavated the Batans caves over years of fieldwork. H. Otley Beyer and colleagues, publishing in Antiquity, dated the Cagayan Valley sites, and when it finally came, it came to a place that already had people in it. Lots of them, for tens of thousands of years. One boat, one crossing, one people stepping off it. That is the version in the grade school books, and 3 specific parts of it are wrong. H. Otley Beyer's waves of migration, arriving in order, moving down the map from north to south. I am going to name all 3. Then I am going to come back to those 2 numbers. First, 1,000 years when the water was sitting right there and nobody went. Then the 5 arrivals, and what it means that every one of them ended up speaking the same kind of language. Then the family tree itself, which branches in a direction the map never shows. 1,000 years of that water went uncrossed, and the reason one linguist gives for it comes down to a single piece of wood. Taiwan sits 142 kilometers from Mavalis, the northernmost island of the Philippines. Orchid Island cuts that in half. Farmers were living on the Taiwan side more than 5,000 years ago, growing rice and millet. For 1,000 years after that, nobody crossed. The route was open every year. Those 142 kilometers are open water only in stretches. The strait is broken into pieces by islands. Orchid Island, then the Batans chain, then the Babuyan group, then Luzon. Nobody did. Russell Gray, Alexi Drummond, and Simon Greenhill published a phylogeny of 400 Austronesian languages in Science in 2009. They put the family's origin in Taiwan at around 5,230 years ago. Hung's archaeology in the Cagayan Valley puts the first Neolithic settlement there between 4,200 and 4,000 years back. Line those up and the gap runs more than 1,000 years. Twice everything since Magellan. The pause itself is Gray's finding. It is in the title of that 2009 paper, Pulses and Pauses. What Robert Blust added, writing in the Annual Review of Linguistics in 2019, was a reason for it. His proposal is that the boats of the time could not reliably make the crossing. He does not say what those boats were, and nobody has dug up a 4,000-year-old one to tell us. What ended the pause in his account was the invention of the outrigger canoe complex, the katig. Go down to almost any fishing beach in this country, and you will see one, an arm riding out over the water alongside the hull, holding the whole thing level. Blust says may have been. The hedge is his, and it is in the paper on purpose. That accounts for the boat. It accounts for nothing about who was already standing on the far shore. 5 separate peoples reached these islands. 3 of them came from the same direction, and it still does not explain the language. Say your word for I again, Mata. That word sits on top of all 5. Larina's team counted at least 5. Northern and southern Negrito branches of a basal Australasian group who picked up Denisovan ancestry here, inside these islands. Papuan-related groups from the east, and 3 branches of basal East Asians, Manobo, Sama, and last, the Cordillerans. The Cordilleran date breaks the school version. Lorena's team put the divergence of Cordilleran ancestors from the indigenous peoples of Taiwan at 8,000 years ago at the earliest. thousands of years before the first red-slipped pot appears in Cagayan. Their own paper says the findings contradict an exclusive out-of-Taiwan model. The maternal lines say something similar with a different instrument. In 2016, Andrea Brandao and colleagues sequenced whole mitochondrial genomes across Taiwan and island Southeast Asia. About 20% of the maternal lineages in the modern regional pool came out of that Taiwan dispersal, 1 line in 5, on the mother's side. Most of the rest goes back to something older, sea levels rising after the last ice age, pushing people around these islands long before anyone grew rice. And every Philippine ethnic group in Lorena's study speaks a language from one branch of one family, Malayo-Polynesian. Lorena's paper has a phrase for the mismatch: linguistic genetic dissonance. That is what the KTG did. Somebody on a beach watches a boat come in with an arm out over the water, holding it level. A shape like that gets copied out of whatever grows where the watcher lives by people who never met the ones who built the first one. 5 populations were already standing on these islands. 1 maternal line in 5 is nowhere near enough to push them off. But a shape gets copied by whoever sees it, and the words come along with the thing. The language traveled further than the people carrying it. 6 researchers put that to the test in June of 2024. Build the family tree out of vocabulary alone, and its first branch sits south of Mindanao. Draw the arrow on the map and you draw it downward. Taiwan at the top, then Batanes, then Luzon, then the Visayas, then Mindanao. That is the poster in most classrooms here. They published in Scientific Reports, Benedict King, Simon Greenhill, Lawrence Reed, Malcolm Ross, Mary Walworth, and Russell Gray. They took 147 Philippine language varieties plus 55 from Taiwan. Then they coded 7,500 sets of related words across 185 basic meanings, things like I and fire and two, and let a Bayesian model build the family tree from that vocabulary alone. The first branch to split off sits in northern Sulawesi, Sangiric and Minahasan. The model puts that split first with a posterior probability of 0.91, which in this kind of analysis is about as close to settled as the method gets. Then the Botanic languages. Ivatan, Itbayatan, the ones closest to Taiwan. In this tree they sit inside the Luzon group, and they branch late. The word the paper uses for a simple north to south dispersal is incompatible. What they found instead runs the other way, a general pattern of south to north. The excavation argues against it. Bellwood and Dizon's 2005 report says the excavated material shows no sign of Batanes being settled first from the south by way of Luzon. The pots and the adzes point north. The vocabulary points south. I lean toward the tree, and here is why. Pottery moves with trade. Words move with children. Then there are the languages that arrive from somewhere else entirely. One of the languages of the Visayas came up out of Borneo, and one of the languages of Taiwan is Philippine. The traffic never stopped in either direction. Xiaochun Hung and colleagues ran green nephrite through an electron probe in 2007, a machine that reads the chemical fingerprint of a stone, and matched artifacts from Batans, the Cagayan Valley and Batangas, to a single jade source in eastern Taiwan. That stone kept crossing for centuries after the language did. Robert Bluss traced the Sama-Baja languages of the southern Philippines to the Burido region of southeastern Borneo. Their road ran north out of Borneo, while everyone was still drawing arrows coming down. And one of those languages, Inabaknon, is spoken on Kapil Island in northern Samar, a Bornean-descended language sitting in the middle of the Visayas. The clearest case is Orchid Island, 40-odd kilometers off the Taiwanese coast, where the Tao people speak Yami, the one indigenous language in Taiwan that is Malayo-Polynesian rather than Formosan, a Philippine language spoken in Taiwan today. Every one of those crossings moved something light, a word, a stone, a shape. None of them moved a population. That traffic ran for 4,000 years. The arrival, every schoolbook names came under a Spanish flag. 3 centuries of Spanish rule left detectable ancestry in fewer than 1 in 100 of the people they sampled. Lorena's team looked for it across all 1,028 people they sampled. The West Eurasian admixture they found dates between 100 and 450 years ago, and it sat concentrated in a few urban lowland groups, among Bicolanos and among Chavacano speakers. 3 centuries of colonial rule, and that is what the genome holds. Ships show up one more time in this story. The tree cannot say which side of them the switch fell on. Communities here switched into Austronesian 10 separate times, and the most recent of those switches may have happened after Spanish ships were already in the water. King and his colleagues counted 10 independent shifts scattered across the tree, and everyone falls inside roughly the last 2,000 years. The oldest sits just over 1,900 years ago. The youngest, for Ada Pamplona in Cagayan, is bracketed at no more than 437 years. That number sets a ceiling and nothing more. The model cannot separate 4 centuries ago from last year. But the ceiling itself lands somewhere in the 1500s. The same century Spanish ships reached these islands. Whether the switch fell before those ships or after them, the model cannot say. Lawrence Reed had argued for decades that these shifts were early. Negrito and non-Negrito people living and working alongside each other, the children of the community growing up speaking one language, whatever their parents spoke at home. Reed is a co-author on the paper that found 10 separate late dates. His own hypothesis is the one it goes against. 10 shifts, each on its own ground, none of them the same event. And the paper found something else. The switch left no mark on the basic vocabulary at all. Whole lexicons taken up, nothing of the old language retained where they looked. The pottery is older than all of it. The pottery lands in the Cagayan Valley 8 centuries before the languages of these islands start splitting apart. 4,200 years for the pots, 3,379 for the first split, 8 centuries of nothing in between. Hold that number loosely. The paper gives a range around it, running from 2,570 years to 4,208. The far end of that range is older than the pottery, which would leave no gap at all. The middle is where the estimate actually sits, and the middle is where I am arguing from. Languages fracture the moment their speakers stop talking to each other. 2 villages, 1 mountain between them, 3 generations, and the vocabulary starts to drift. Scatter a founding population across thousands of islands, and the branching should start almost at once. King and his colleagues measured the gap a second way. Before the Philippine languages divide, their tree carries one unbroken branch with a median length of 1,219 years, 40 generations give or take, a single line and no splits anywhere along it. A branch that long means one language was spreading while others died underneath it. Linguists have a name for the thing that would explain it, and they have been fighting over that name for 30 years, Proto-Philippines. The idea is that one language came through these islands and erased almost everything spoken here before it, and 30 years of argument have produced 2 surviving words. The idea runs like this. The first arrivals scatter. Their speech diversifies quietly for centuries. Then a second language comes through and flattens all of it. One group expanding for farmland, absorbing everything in its path, until every surviving language traces back to that second wave instead of the first. If that happened, most of what came ashore 4,200 years ago is gone. Robert Blust argued for Proto-Philippines in Oceanic Linguistics in 2019. The objections filled the following volume. Malcolm Ross, David Zork, and Xu Chuan Liao each published against it. 2 years before that, Alexander Smith had gone through the words supposed to mark this ancestral language and concluded that only 2 of them survive as genuine replacements. 2 words, bulbul, feather, dakil, big. King's own paper says the long branch potentially supports the idea and stops there. They also flag something honest about their dates. The whole tree hangs from a starting point of 5,200 years, borrowed from the 2009 science analysis. Move that anchor and every date inside the tree slides with it. Now look north, at the shape this archipelago never took. One island, crossable in a day, holds 9 separate branches of this family. Thousands of islands down here, and the tree keeps collapsing back toward a single trunk. In 1999, Blust worked through the 14 surviving indigenous languages of Taiwan and found they do not form a single group. 14 languages, 9 primary branches, each one splitting off at the very base of the family. Each division, in his reading, runs as deep as the one separating them from every Austronesian language outside Taiwan, which is why he says there is no Proto-Formosan left to reconstruct. That shape is what a leveling episode leaves behind. It is also what a fast expansion leaves behind, and no one has published a way to tell the two apart. Taiwan kept the depth. These islands kept the spread, and the question of what flattened them is still open. Bayer's waves of migration are still being taught in Philippine classrooms, and the correction has been open access for years. You can read all of it free tonight. Larina's 2021 paper is open in PNAS. The King Team's 2024 analysis is open in Scientific Reports. And the Austronesian Comparative Dictionary lives at acd.clld.org, where you can type in the word for eye and see every language that carries it, laid out beside the reconstruction. Every paper in this episode is linked in the description. This episode gives you the summary, the dictionary entry gives you the evidence. Which brings this back to the two numbers from the start. Two institutions counted the languages of the same country and came out 40 apart, and some of what sits inside the larger count is not a Philippine language. Ethnologues 175 comes from a database with a paywall across the itemized list, so you cannot open it and check the entries yourself. The Komisyon sa Wikang Filipino mapped 134 Philippine languages, plus Filipino itself. David Zorc and Jason Lobel went through the larger count. Chavacano is in there, a Spanish-based Creole from Zamboanga. Then Escayan, created in Bohol in the 1920s by Mariano Dadahan, a veteran of the island's Republican Army. Grammatically, it is Cebuano. The vocabulary was replaced, word by word, with something that resembles no Philippine language, and three entries they say have no evidence behind them at all. As for the rest, whether they descend from one Philippine ancestor is the argument you just heard. Smith went looking for the words that would hold it up and found two. Three things the school version gets wrong, and all three have landed. The water that sat there uncrossed for 1,000 years, the 5 arrivals, and every one of them speaking the same kind of language, and a family tree whose first branch sits south of Mindanao, which leaves the Katig. The boat in the title is a shape, light enough to copy off a beach out of whatever already grows there. One maternal line in 5 could never have pushed 5 earlier peoples off these islands. A shape that gets copied does not have to. Say the word one more time. Mata. In Hawaiian it comes out Maka. In Malagasy, on the far side of the Indian Ocean, Maso. The Austronesian Comparative Dictionary sets them side by side, the same word bent by the same rules, worn down by everything it crossed. So when someone tells you Filipinos came from Taiwan, you have a better answer now. 5 separate arrivals put people on these islands across 50,000 years. Then something crossed from the north that weighed nothing at all, and every one of those peoples took it up. The boat rotted and the beach moved. Everyone who stepped off it has been dead 4,000 years. You still have their word for the thing you are seeing this with. Send this to whoever taught you the waves of migration. Next, the jade that kept crossing that channel for 3,000 years after the language did.